Welcome to Peace at Home Parenting. I'm Ruth Freeman, licensed clinical social worker and founder of Peace at Home Parenting. I'm very happy to be here today with my colleagues, Amy and Bradford. Amy and Bradford, I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourselves. Amy, go ahead.
Hi there, I'm Amy Alamar, and I'm a trained educator in K-12 and higher education, and my two books are on marrying our best practices with students and how we use them in our families.
Thank you.
Great. I'm Bradford WIles. I live in Kansas and work at Kansas State University for my associate professor position. I have been working in parent education for 15 or more years now, and it's great to be here.
Thank you. Today we're talking about a very difficult subject, how to talk with kids of all different ages about gun violence. And I was trying to think about how to start this conversation, and right before I came into this meeting, my daughter called me about having a conversation with her 4-year-old daughter about the trial that came to a conclusion today. So there's all kinds of issues that parents are struggling with and how to talk to their kids about it. One of the things that I want to start with young children, if that's okay with you, just sort of do it chronologically until we get some questions. But children, pre-K through kindergarten, young children, the two guidelines that I came across were they need to be protected and keep it a one-sentence story. Do you guys have any thoughts about that or specifics related to that?
Yeah, so keep them protected is sort of an extension of that would be let them know that that's your job, to keep them safe. Point out to them other people in the world that are there to keep them safe, whether they're in school. You said pre-K, right? So they may be in a school setting or childcare setting. There's certainly coaches and mentors and other extended family members, neighbors, friends, etc., letting them know we're all here to kind of keep an eye on you. And certainly as they get older into the elementary years, there are more formal roles there to protect them. So even something as simple as, coming out of the pandemic, all these people who have been working at the grocery store and the pharmacy or delivering packages, they're all here to make sure that we are together and safe. And so being grateful for that.
And actually, one of the guidelines that I came across was once you're talking to elementary school kids, invite them to say, who's in your life to keep you safe? Even the family dog, who's in your life to keep you safe? Bradford, do you have any other thoughts about young children, through kindergarten, preschool and kindergarten?
Yeah, I concur with Amy, and I would also say that children are very egoistic at this, in those years. And so they're not quite concerned about sort of the larger culture of violence or, any of the sort of more, formalized thinking that we experience as adults. And so, really remembering that they're concerned about themselves and where they stand in the world. And so, focusing on that as their foremost need will really go a long way for children that young. And regarding the one sentence, certainly, you want to be as concise as you can be for young children. It helps them understand.
And I think that we all agree that we do everything we can to protect them from those stories. And in general, we're not even going to discuss it with them unless they bring it to us. We're not going to be chatting with them about the news in that way with young children. But they may be exposed to it. Or if you think your child might be exposed to it by others, then, for example, if their best friend's mom tells you that he heard about it last night and he's probably going to be talking to your kid about it, you might want to talk about it. But in general, our job with those very young children is to simply protect them and keep those stories away from them to the best of our ability, and be really careful about not just leaving television on since there's constant stories happening.
And Ruth, when you say stuff like that, right, like keep them protected and shelter them, I agree with you. And I also know that we can't protect them from everything, even at very young ages. And so part of that is always being a safe place for them to come and talk. And so a lot of our classes talk about, talking with your kids about violence, or talking with your kids about potty training, right? It could be anything. And so
And
talking with your kids and keeping that dialogue open is really important, so that if they are exposed to it and you weren't anticipating that, they feel comfortable asking you a question. And that does start really young. Bradford was dead on about that egocentric mentality. And they also don't always distinguish real from fake when they're quite young. And so they may have some questions or even say something that might clue you in, like, maybe it's time to chat about that.
Yeah, and actually, if kids see it happen on a screen, you don't mean to let that happen, but it may happen. They actually think it's happening right then. Young children don't think that that's a video of something in the past, and if they see it again, they think it happened again, because they're so in the present moment. So keeping that in mind and helping them try to understand that. One idea that I'm aware of is, when kids ask, could it happen to me? If you say, no, it could never happen to you, that actually kind of cuts off the conversation. And it's one of those conversation closers that Amy's always reminding us about. Total denial is not going to be helpful to anybody. We can kind of say it's so unlikely. There's 100,000 schools in our country, and it's so unlikely, that'll happen in your school. But just saying, no, it could never happen, in some ways just shuts kids down, which is exactly what we don't want to be doing. When you think about elementary school kids, one of the pieces of guidance that I thought was very helpful was decide in advance what you want the takeaways to be. So while you're going to listen very carefully, and we can talk specifically how to listen to elementary school kids, thinking about what's the important things that I want my kids to take away from this. And I actually thought about that a little bit. But when you think about elementary school kids, are there ways that it's different than for kindergarten or preschool? What's different? How might you do it differently?
Yeah, I'll start, Amy, and say that the biggest difference is the influence of peers and older siblings in that environment, right? So as children start to age into the elementary school years, they're getting much more of the social environment, much more of that influence from their context, school, extracurricular activities, all the things that we do socially. And yes, those have been have declined due to the pandemic, but I think we're all hopeful that those things will start to really pick up even more so. And so, that's the biggest difference in terms of the influence, but then also their ability to process information is starting to grow and grow and grow. And so they're going to have questions and feelings that are not easily explained in one or two sentences, right? So we need to begin to think about what their needs are, and doing all the things that we do as people in terms of balancing our risks and understanding what the challenges are, and things that we might be more concerned about than others. Gun violence is tragic and unacceptable, and so I don't want to dismiss that in any way. And I also encourage parents to recognize that many times these for children in the elementary years, they are outsized concerns to the sort of actuarial table of risk and of tragedy.
Do you mean kids see it as a more realistic problem, more likely to happen to them than it really is in terms of numbers?
Yes, but make no mistake. I mean, everybody thinks that until until it happens to them. And so, I don't want to dismiss that. But I also, want us to also talk with our kids about what some of the things that are most important are in terms of keeping them safe, like now wearing a mask, wearing your seatbelt, not jumping in front of a bus. I mean, not that being hit by a bus is, prevalent, but you understand, right?
There's a lot of ways to stay safe.
Yeah, and that we do everything we can to prevent those. And so, but I concur with you as well. You don't want to dismiss, right? And so if you're like, well, hey, the odds of that are less than being struck by lightning, like that's it, right?
Right. You don't want to be closed down.
Yeah, I think it's reassurance versus dismissive, right? And one thing to do too is to invite them into the conversation. So Ruth, you said, have an idea of what you want your takeaways to be. And I'm always talking about like, let go of expectations of where a conversation might go, right? Like, so you could say, this is what I really want you to hear. You're allowed to say that. You're allowed to have a lesson plan, right? And that's the educator in me. You're allowed to say, this is what's super important to me because of my values, because of my opinions, because of how I was brought up, whatever it is, right? To keep you safe. And then you can say, and now what is it that you do take away? Like, what is it that's really important to you? And elementary age kids should be involved in that conversation. And so, yeah, what do we already do to keep ourselves safe? What can we continue to do to keep ourselves safe? And it's okay to talk about, like even role play. Well, what would, sometimes we don't even think as parents to say, is there a gun at the house where my kid is having a play date? There could be a gun at the house. Do you ask the parents and talk to your child? What would you do if somebody pulled out a gun? It happens. And it doesn't just have to be a gun that gets pulled out. It could be drugs. It could be crossing the street by themselves if they're quite young, right? Like there's a lot of things they can do that can lead to danger. And most of the time they're going to be okay. So if it's that reassurance, but then also that role-playing questioning, that can really prepare them, because you might ask them, what will they do if they find a gun at a friend's house? But it may be that they found something else there, right? And they'll be prepared for the unknown.
Yeah, I completely agree.
It's interesting. The National Parenting Education Network has talked about when your kid visits a home to ask the question, are there guns in the home and where are they and how are they kept? And when teenagers are going places, sometimes you'll ask, is there alcohol in the house? Where's that alcohol kept? I used to ask, what's the supervision going to be? How often will you be? Even for teenagers. So, this is all the big question of safety. And we're kind of narrowing it down to how do we handle gun violence? How do we talk about this in particular? I think that, with tweens, the 11, 12, in some ways that it might be one of the most challenging ages to talk about this because they're beginning that changes in the brain, the brain changes, and they might have big feelings. And I think, one of the main guidelines, which you've kind of pointed out, both of you pointed out, is the importance of listening. This isn't a talk. This is really listening. The more you listen, the better this conversation is going to go. Yeah. And I think some of the things we're listening to is when they raise the question, is listening to the feelings they're having, the emotions they're having about this, and listening to what they already know. Like I always love, Amy, that you point out. So tell me what you've heard. Tell me what you know about gun violence. What have you learned about gun violence? In many cases, kids have had whole sections in their classrooms and had conversations. They may know more than you do. And asking them about that. What have they heard? What do they know? What do they feel? I think that's our number one job, especially starting around tweens and into teens, right?
Yeah. You say tweens, it could be the hardest time. They're still playful, and yet they're developing into these independent adults. And so they can be quite fun. And this is a time to engage them on activism. When they're young, they can kind of mimic your values. But even starting around 10 or 11, they're going to, as Bradford pointed out, they're going to be aware of what's going on around them. They're peer influence. And so it's really a great idea to invite them into the conversation about activism. Like, what do they believe in? And it's not a yes or a no, right? Like, you may be a gun family, right? So then what does the safety conversation, what does the news look like to you, right? Because people who own guns actually are quite well trained in many most circumstances, I would say, without the knowledge of the statistics, right, on knowing gun safety. So then it's more of a conversation about that. But, processing tragedy is different from how do I keep myself safe, right? And so that's where the activism comes in. And when I say activist, I'm not saying, you can go out there with a poster and march, right? But I'm actually talking about, like, who are you in the world and what role will you play, and how will you have these conversations moving forward? So that's what a tween can really get a kick out of, because this is where they're asserting themselves as independent.
And I think especially with tweens and teens, teens, I was just with some teenagers this weekend, as a matter of fact, and they were really characterized. And I think this can be said about a lot of teenagers. They were searching for their parents and the other adults' hypocrisy. They were looking for the ways that we say one thing and do another. And these kids were particularly focusing on racism and the trial, and related to George Floyd. And they were really pushing us on what did our activism look like and what action steps were we taking. And their pushback about, you're not doing enough about racism. You're not, you're just giving it lip service. A lot of parents get hurt or they feel attacked or something, but in fact, that's exactly how they're formulating their thinking. Yes. And if you can't be a neutral, interested, bouncing off point and be willing to reflect. The big challenge for me when you're talking to teenagers, they're so passionate and sometimes not completely realistic, but they're so passionate that if I dismiss them, if I say, well, if you had a job and you were working X numbers of hours, you wouldn't be doing much either. If I shut them down, I've really not done my job of cultivating their self-awareness and their passion. And, Dan Siegel calls it sparks, kids, teenagers' ideas and thinking outside the box and their intensity. And I think that's such a gift to us. And we have to be willing to reflect. We have to be willing to say, maybe I should be doing more. You have teenagers, Amy. Have you had any of this?
Oh, yes. Yes. And I'm glad to hear that I'm doing it right if they're fighting back. So yeah, no, you're definitely asking them to develop their own value system. And oftentimes like I said, it mimics yours, and then it does become really different. And they should challenge you. And it's okay for you not to agree. It's okay for you to have two, very, very, very different opinions. And believe me, politics is a huge conversation at our table. And sometimes we're so angry with one another and realize we both essentially want the same thing, but we have different ways of going about it, right? And I think that's valuable, because you won't, when you stop reflecting on who you are and your role, then you will stop affecting change. And so that's the key. And, teenagers know everything. And I don't say that to be glib. They want to like, they're in it, right? They're learning it academically. They're experiencing it. We've sort of gotten comfortable, right? And so and don't let my children quote me on this, but they really know everything.
Yes. Mark Twain once said, "I'm not young enough to know everything," and that's exactly right. I do, and I completely concur that this is a good time to really involve them in those higher order thinking, options. The identity building especially is so critical. And, I'll just say that with regard to gun violence especially, I like earlier, Amy, you had mentioned that it's an opportunity to have a conversation about whether it's drugs or guns or alcohol or, what have you. What do you do? And so, thinking about gun safety in that way, that often can be sort of a really easy portal into these more I want to say grayer areas, right? And getting back to the hypocrisy element, right? So maybe your parents drink and they're telling you don't want to be drinking. And so, right. But everybody can agree that if you see a gun and you're inexperienced with that, or you feel uncomfortable, these are things that you need to do. And then you can scaffold those as you go forward with other, harms. And so I would say that can also help ease that more generalized fear if there's some understanding of, what to do and, what safety looks like. But I would really encourage parents to, to ask about, storage and what's in the home. And I think it's important knowledge. And, I also concur in fact, almost all gun owners are, extraordinarily responsible with their firearms. They're not leaving them out for anyone. They are very safe with them. That said, all it takes is once, and there are way too many accidents and intentional consequences from the use of guns in the country. And so
and I think it's interesting that the conversation, right? We've gone to safety, which is something we talk about a lot, and talking to our kids about it. And I think that is a result, or could be a result, of these conversations. But going back to sort of the main topic about talking about violence, right? Like what we've gone to is like, okay, how do we prepare for safety? But talking about these tragic actions, right? Like, how do you do that? And I think it's okay to also say, I don't know, right? Like, why do people kill each other? Or how did that possibly happen? And it's okay to start with, I don't know. Let's talk about it, right? Like, and it's more about the emotions it's evoking. And then it naturally leads to like where we've gone, right? Like we together, right, are all solutions focused. So that's where we've gone. But again, letting go of that conversation and seeing where it goes. Your child may have concerns that really never occurred to you when they think about it. Like they might be worried about what could happen at school. Or they might just be thinking about the family of that person in the news, or they might be thinking about a friend who was affected, right? So it's important to be aware of like why are you asking, or what can I do? How can we process together? And it's always okay to say, I'm not sure.
We have some questions, but I just really want to emphasize the listening part of this. It's really, this was called talking about gun violence, but this is really 90% listening about these kinds of difficulties and how we listen. And I think, asking, it sounds like you feel kind of concerned about that, or you seem a little worried about that. That reflective listening is the open response where they tell you. Someone's asking about what happens if they start to have nightmares. And if kids are having nightmares, there's a few possibilities. One is that they may be worried about other things and they've taken that event and it's turned into the nightmare, but it may be other kinds of worries. So you want to listen carefully to kids' worries. If they're having repeated nightmares, you want to talk to somebody at school, or you want to talk to your pediatrician and get some strategies, cognitive behavioral therapy, or different kinds of brain calming practices. You want some strategies to help the child work on it. And just discussing it sometimes can bring it up. Dreams are unconscious ways of working out difficulties. So they're working out some difficulty. It may not be exactly what is being displayed, but if it's recurring and it goes over a matter of weeks, then you just want to get a little support to think about how to address this. So what age should I talk about catastrophes, police brutality, gun violence, bad guys? My 4.5-year-old is asking about George Floyd and is she safe from the police? You have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, please, Amy. Please.
I think you're never too young to have these conversations. You do want to keep it age appropriate. Thank you. You don't want to scare your child, but you also don't want to lie to your child. And so that's creating that safe space where they come to you. And I'm actually glad that your daughter asked that question, because that means she's thinking about it and she feels comfortable coming to you. So again, here's it's to say, I don't know your family. I don't know where you live, and I don't know your experience. However, I can just suggest to you that having that conversation and going to more knowledgeable others, right? Experienced parents in the neighborhood or who have gone through this can be helpful to you. But really just reassuring your daughter, like, my job is to keep you safe. And even if I don't have all the answers for you, I'm going to find them with you, right? That's a good place to start.
And I think that saying your perspective can also be helpful. Saying that I feel safe with most police, and I think that you're safe with most police too. That's what I believe. And sometimes there's a police person that does very bad things, but it's very, 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 very unusual.
Well,
And
again, we don't know the experience, right? And so it may be that you share another experience with your child if that's been
that's
yours.
right.
And,
That's
and
right.
it's okay to say that. It's okay to say, actually, I
I don't
don't
really
feel
trust
safe.
police.
And this is what I do. Yeah.
And this is what I do. This is what I do to protect myself because I don't feel safe with police. That's a very good point. I'm sort of doing it from my own cultural bias.
Right. And I would just add that, yeah, that honesty is the best policy goes all the way from, 4.5, and, into adulthood, right? You might navigate things differently at different times. And as your children become older, you'll be able to use more nuanced language and things like that. But you don't want to dismiss them and you don't want to deny the existence of any of these things.
If, and I, if like I'm a white person, so I just revealed my bias by saying I trust most police. I trust most policemen in my experience. So if you come from a culture that feels safe, but you recognize that people of color may not feel safe, you can use Amy's strategy of talking to a parent from a family of color and saying to the parent, "What do you say to your kid?" And helping your child see that there's different ways of seeing this. Different people feel this differently about this, and that's kind of the truth. And it's a confusing topic. And I like the we can learn about this together. And there may also be some age appropriate like bibliotherapy books to help kids talk about these topics. Just talking to your local children's librarian or your preschool teacher. Are there books that'll help my child learn about these issues in a safe way?
And that goes back for the parent of the 4-year-old, right? Or 4.5-year-old. That goes back to like, who is in your community keeping you safe? Sure, police people, but also who else? And really pointing out that to them. I also think this is a great opportunity as kids are older, for, again, to voice their own opinions on these things. And how if you want to affect change or if you don't, right? Like, how do you voice your role in the world? And that can be really powerful. Again, they'll mimic you in the beginning, but then they'll come up with their own ways of doing that. Yeah.
And the question of, when do I talk about catastrophe? At what age should I talk about catastrophe? I just want to go back. I don't know if this parent was here, but I want to go back to for young children under, kindergarten and under. My instinct is you protect them from these difficulties. If they bring it up, then you talk about it, but you don't talk about the George Floyd trial. You don't talk about gun violence unless they bring it up. For the most part, you just keep it off the table until they're likely to hear about it.
Like earlier you said, Ruth, you said, don't say this will never, ever happen, right? We don't want to lie to our kids. But at the same token, we don't want to catastrophize things. Oh my God, we're never going to be safe. COVID's going to get everyone. Like, you don't want to scare them. So I agree with you that, you definitely want to watch what you say. So it's being honest, but then processing your adult feelings in a very adult way. So that's with, a spouse or partner or a friend or another family member or a therapist or a parent coach, whatever it is, but not sort of unleashing on your child, no matter how old they are. Teens too. Teens are vulnerable. And they can't process your adult feelings. They might look like they could process just about anything, but they can't.
Yeah. Well, it could be, they take it in a way that can be very distressing to them, even though they may not show that. And if at all possible, you process your big emotions with people you trust and who can support you. Then you can do it in a more calm, reassuring way. Because essentially, for all ages, you essentially want to be reassuring and respectful.
Yeah.
One thing I want to say about teens is that focusing on what action steps we can take, I think, is a great way to build resilience, to show respect for the teen. And you can frame this in what action steps do you want to take or have you taken? What action steps do you wish were being taken? What action steps can we do together? And really inviting them to have agency, to feel like they can make a difference. And I think that is the takeaway I want kids to kind of have. If I think in advance of what I want in the end, it's that we can do something. I think that's one of the most comforting messages we can give. And I also love I don't know if we talked about this. I think you might have said this, Amy, but I love the Mr. Rogers message. Look at all the help that comes streaming in. Look at all the good. Look at all the good that comes of this. Um, I think Rabbi Kushner's book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Um, look at what it inspires. Look at the love that comes out. Look at the support that comes out, and really, talking specifically about what you see around any given event. If I know a parent is a gun owner, how do I know they're safety conscious? Do I ask? As of, I have to say, I was a little naive about this when my kids were growing up. And today, I think if my kids were going somewhere, I would ask if there are guns in the house. I would ask where they're kept. I would ask if the bullets and the guns are in the same place. I mean, I'd ask a few questions, and I'd ask, how do you assure safety? How do you know they don't know the passwords? I would ask the questions.
And I think the point here too is you're never going to ask all the right questions or protect your child from everything. And so you're showing your child, this is important to me. Just like if you're going to ask if a parent will be home or if alcohol will be served, you don't know that you're going to get the right answer. Things change. People have good intentions. Things get out of hand. So the fact that you're asking shows your child that this is important enough that you're taking time out of your day to worry about it. And the fact that you're talking about it with your child, that's the most important thing. I mean, you're never going to ask all the questions to keep them safe. You just can't.
And also, you could ask a gun owner, if you know a gun owner, you could ask them, what are some questions I can ask to that'll be respectful and will help me determine this. And you can ask, and you can tell the kid they can ask the question if they prefer. But the kids, if they're teenagers, they're going to be annoyed with you. But that's kind of a
par for the course.
Right? It's kind of chronic. So.
If I can chime in, I would say, my own biases aside, respectful gun owners will have no problem explaining to any adult what their safety measures are. If you ask the question and they hesitate or are dismissive, flatly that they're likely not terribly concerned about gun safety in their home. I mean,
or it's a red flag of some kind.
Yeah, I mean, people who understand that risk also understand how important it is to store them properly. And again, to your point, accidents do happen. But if you're asking that question and you're getting anything other than a very flat, open response, then I would encourage you to really rethink what you're asking your son or daughter or your child to do in that situation. Because I would just speak for myself and many of the I shot trap for the Virginia Tech target team. So I guess what I'll say is that it's anyone who is serious about guns at all will give you a straight answer.
Mm. Yeah. Is there anything else we want to just make sure we mention?
I would be interested to know, people watching, what questions their kids are asking, or are they not showing any interest in the conversation, right? Like, how is it affecting their children? Because what I've noticed, and it's in the news, is as we sort of come out of sheltering in place slowly, more and more violence has happened. We've seen mass shootings in multiple states with, in different contexts, workplace scenarios. And so I'm very curious to know, is this becoming, I see a comment, they seem a bit numb. And I was going to say, is it becoming normalized again, right? Like, we want kids to be horrified by this, but we don't want them to be scared and devastated, right? So we don't want them to be numb to this. And so it's okay to share your emotion. I am, I can't turn on the news without being a little bit surprised, right? Or sad. And so to acknowledge it. And one thing we talk about in in a lot of our classes is talking with our kids. And sometimes it's over the dinner table. Sometimes it's, in the car, wherever it is, making sure that you touch on the topics that are important to you if your kids aren't bringing it up. I think that's really important.
And, one way to talk to, especially teenagers, is to say, what are kids saying about this? Mm-hmm. And sometimes it doesn't put the kid on the hot seat. And they'll tell you their opinions by saying, well, a lot of my friends think this. And then you can have the conversation without it being, you know, forcing them to expose themselves necessarily.
Yeah.
Um, and and really conversation, I mean, Amy's the expert at this, but conversation meaning I express my point of view, I inquire about your point of view, I listen respectfully to your point of view, I reflect it back to make sure I understand it, and then I might, you know, respond to it. That's an art. What I just described, all that stuff, Amy, I probably left some things out that are important, but we know, research tells us that when kids grow up in homes where that happens, where the adults express a point of view respectfully, or interested in the kid's point of view, the kid gets to have a go back and forth. We know that resilience and recovery happen better for those kids. Those kids are more resilient. They have stronger social skills. The dinner table might not look like, you know, the Cleaver family, or is that too young? Is that too old? It might not look like a TV family because you're disagreeing, and you know, you might get passionate about it. But it really strengthens kids' resilience, and it strengthens their sense of safety in the world. Ironically, those disagreements are incredible gifts to our kids, and respectfully being curious about their point of view.
And it's okay to go back to a conversation. So say you already had a conversation and it didn't go as planned. Maybe you didn't respectfully or reflectively listen, right? Or maybe you told your kid you were dismissive and you were like, no, you're wrong. You should be sad about this. That was a really awful incident. And I'm scared about your emotional capacity that you're not upset, right? Maybe you said something you're not proud of. It's okay to come back to and be like, I'm not proud of the way I handled that, right? Or I've been thinking a lot about it. And this is why I think I reacted this way. You can always revisit, just like you could at work, just like, you know, nothing is ever set in stone. And so don't be afraid to admit that you were wrong, that you weren't proud of how you reacted, that you didn't think of everything, because you are showing your child that you are vulnerable and you are imperfect, but yet you still can come back and be strong and have that conversation with them. That will build a trust between the two of you that's so valuable. So it's not like we're telling you to always sit back and be perfect. There are times where I have spaced out. I'm thinking of something else. I'm multitasking. I'm looking at my phone and I'm like, wait, what? That is not great reflective listening. You know, and so we fall victim to that. So don't beat yourself up. Don't label yourself a bad parent if that's happened, because it's normal. It's human. Just be willing to go back to it when it's really important.
And I want to remind folks that adolescence is the most narcissistic developmental stage of all developmental stages. They're thinking about themselves more than they ever have and ever will in their whole lifetimes, for a whole variety of reasons. And even if your child is disagreeing with you about something of great importance to you, you know, maybe, for example, you have a very strong faith and you've gone to church, you know, all their lives, and they've been part of the youth group, and they suddenly say, I don't believe in God, you know, whatever. They say the thing that's going to be like, don't, first of all, assume that's going to be their life position just because they're so passionate about it right now. And second of all, be curious about, you know, what led them to this. I mean, I remember one time, my daughter was only like 8 or 9, and this neighbor was saying something about church school or something, and my daughter just says, I don't believe in God, but I do believe in the devil. You know, it just came out of nowhere. And this was a very religious lady down the road. And I was like, wow. And I was really, I didn't know what to say. I was embarrassed, but I didn't want to shut her down. And she goes, yeah, I've seen a lot of really bad things happen. People get killed and really bad things happen. And I just haven't seen that many miracles. And it was quite challenging. And of course, I went into, you know, when a baby is born, it's like a miracle, but it was weak. But if I had just, and I was so embarrassed, but if I had just shut her down at that point, I would have done much more harm. And I had to just swallow my embarrassment and say, well, that's not how I see it. And maybe we need to pay more attention to miracles in the family. But I think that the challenge is to accept where they are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and talking about the miracles, right? Acknowledging the miracles in your family, we would be remiss, Ruth, if we didn't talk about gratitude as we like to do. It's important to recognize what's good in the world. And so what can come of something, and it's not spinning. I'm not talking about being a spin doctor and making sure everything is hunky dory, but it's, well, what can come of it, right? And that goes back to like your role in the world. And so practicing gratitude for what you can learn from a situation or what didn't happen, right? It's okay to be grateful in a moment of tragedy.
And even are you guys hearing an echo from me? Why is that happening? I won't say too much. I'm going to let you close out, Amy. I don't want to be echoing. But I do want to say you can express gratitude to your kid for respectfully disagreeing with you and for thinking independently. And I would always celebrate that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I think that the ability to reflect what they're putting out will be extraordinarily helpful for them. Again, you're modeling these things, and to Amy's point, gun violence is still traumatic for adults, right? I mean, I was in Colorado Springs when the shooting was in Boulder. My 8-year-old was with us. We certainly had these really difficult conversations about gun violence and about what its effect. And of course, Columbine was just up the road. The Aurora movie theater was there, is just there as well. And so it's, it's okay. As adults, we need to forgive ourselves for the trauma that we experience as well as part of it, right? You mentioned that maybe the people coming out of the pandemic are also kind of numb to everything, right? Because it's just been information overload. But that is a result of trauma. I mean, we get numb from trauma. And so, it's really important for us to remember that, we need to forgive ourselves for what we're experiencing and how we are, emoting and communicating, and recognize that, nobody gets 100% of our best every time. And so, recognizing that, everybody makes mistakes, and that you need to be able to process what's going on in terms of the violence in your community, or what you're seeing, as you also process with your child. And so I really encourage parents to be really intentional about their own experience, their own emotions that come from these things, and make sure that they are, processing that as they assist with their own children. It's the classic, put your own mask on before you put your child's on when you're on the airplane, right? And so I just really encourage adults to be kind to themselves.
Amen. Someone just told me my phone was near me, and that's why I was echoing. Amy and Bradford, any other last thoughts? I think we got all our questions. Any other last thoughts? Any other takeaways for folks before we depart today?
So I've said that I think there's the balance that you have to find as a family of sort of turning down the noise. It doesn't mean turning off the screen. It means, what's agitating you. So there's a balance between that and then talking about it. And so maybe one thing to do, probably not with the very young children, but otherwise, is to watch and read and learn together, really understanding things together. And then that gives you the platform to talk about them. I think it's important to experience things together, and it's okay to process your emotions, to share them, but then processing them, as Bradford suggests, in an adult sort of manner.
Any last thoughts, Bradford?
No, other than I really appreciate both of your perspectives, in that it solidifies many of the things that we know about community violence, and that it's going to permeate multiple different areas of our lives, and understanding sort of how important listening is, and then also recognizing that these are opportunities as well, right? There's an opportunity to learn from these things, to do our best to help in our children's development and understanding of the world. And truly, I come from a perspective that our goal is to make sense of the world, and some things we just can't achieve that on. But as I think of human development, that's what we're all about. We're trying to make sense of things. And so doing your best to facilitate that, and being okay with understanding that sometimes you'll never be able to make sense of some things, can go a really long way.
The question being, is the universe friendly or not? I just wanted to remind folks, I sometimes tell this in classes, that after 9/11, they found that children who knew the stories of their ancestors, if they knew the stories of where their ancestors came from, and particularly overcoming diversity, those kids were actually less anxious after 9/11 than kids who knew nothing about their families. And so I was thinking what you were talking about, Amy, how we can kind of go down this rabbit hole of talking about these really intense issues that are coming at us really fast and furious. And I think a counterpoint that can be a real resilience builder is just telling family stories. Your grandmother had to stay in Poland when your grandfather came over. Your grandmother stayed in Poland by herself with one child, and you're and just sort of just describing the stories. It gives kids a context for where they come from, and that people can overcome difficult times. And I think this mix of careful listening, respectful expression of our views, regular daily gratitude practices, which do all kinds of great things for the brain, and telling positive stories about overcoming difficulties. All of those can be a powerful, and just enjoying time with your kids. I mean, we really have to look at childhood and say, we can talk about these difficult issues, but we've got to make a very good balance of playtime, joy, and connection, and let these things be discussed, but within a limitation, and forcing ourselves, turning off the TV, turning off the news channels, and forcing ourselves to just spend positive time in one way or another, because it's been so out of proportion in so many ways. Yeah, Amy.
Yeah, Ruth, a word about resilience, because it's so key, and it's something we want to raise our kids to be resilient, but it's not magic, right? So because you're resilient doesn't mean you're okay, right? And I just want to define, it means you're adapting and you're figuring out, but you still need to process. So you still have emotion. And so it's not like, we've achieved resilience, my kid is fine, they got through this traumatic period. It's, how do we respond to it and communicate with one another? And so they may still demonstrate red flags. They may be losing sleep, changing diet. You want to look for those kinds of things, changing behaviors, friend groups, all of that. And so it just means they're able to adapt, but you're still part of that process. It's not like you're one and done resilient.
And resilient doesn't mean happy all the time.
Yeah.
It means that you can solve some problems and you can get help to solve problems.
That's right.
Means you can process stuff, and all the things we're talking about is what builds that ability to be able to process difficulties. And we certainly want to make room for that, especially right now. I want to thank you both. I am so grateful for our amazing team at Peace at Home Parenting. I always feel much less lonely and much more inspired when I spend some time with you all. I'm always learning something new and reshape my thinking. And I want to encourage parents as well to commit to being lifelong learners. We don't have to have all the answers. We just want to be curious together with our kids about solving these difficulties. So thank you all very much, and thanks for being here.